My in-laws accused me of being a gold digger. Then my attorney sent them a 48-page financial reality check. I was standing on the pristine, hand-scraped white oak floors of my in-laws' multi-million-dollar estate in Malibu, California, holding a glass of Cristal that I hadn't tasted. I was wearing a bespoke charcoal Italian suit that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, looking out through 30-foot glass walls at the Pacific Ocean crashing against the private beach below. It was a flawless evening. The air smelled of expensive catering, ocean salt, and old money. Then, my father-in-law walked up, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "We know what you are." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was pure ice, the kind of engineered, precise tone that only comes from generations of old money, corporate boardrooms, and brutal country club politics. "You married our daughter for her trust fund," he continued, his eyes cutting through me like a scalpel. "And we are not going to stand by and watch you bleed her dry. The ride is over." The entire room went dead silent. 55 people, to be exact. My wife's entire extended family, gathered for her grandmother's 80th birthday celebration, froze mid-cocktail. Crystal glasses stopped clinking. The smooth jazz playing over the hidden architectural speakers suddenly felt like a soundtrack to an execution. Conversations evaporated. Everyone, from the distant venture capitalist uncles to the teenage cousins dressed in designer resort wear, turned to watch Arthur Sterling III publicly brand me a fortune hunter. I had been married to his daughter, Chloe, for exactly 11 months and 16 days. I looked down at my hands. They were steady, but a dangerous, cold heat was beginning to bloom in my chest. Beside me, Chloe's face went entirely white. Her grip on my forearm tightened so hard her knuckles turned translucent. "Dad," Chloe's voice shook, a mix of profound embarrassment and rising fury. "What are you doing? Stop this. Right now." Arthur didn't even glance at her. He kept his eyes locked on me, his chest puffed out under his monogrammed linen shirt. "I'm protecting you, Chloe. I've tolerated this boy for 2 years because I hoped you'd see through the act. But I'm done playing games. To understand how we got to that room in Malibu, you have to understand who Chloe and I are, and where we came from. We met 2 years ago at a high-end biotech charity gala in San Francisco. Tickets started at $5,000 a seat, and the wine list read like an international financial statement. I was there representing my private equity firm as a senior managing partner. She was there because the Sterling Family Foundation had donated the entire venue. We ended up at the same table by pure chance. I expected her to be like the other heiresses I'd met in those circles, bored, detached, obsessed with status. Instead, we ended up talking for 4 hours straight. I fell completely in love with her brilliance, her sharp wit, and her total lack of entitlement. Chloe was 29 and worked as a pediatric oncologist at Stanford Health. She worked 80-hour weeks, dealing with the most heartbreaking cases imaginable, earning a fraction of what her family's trust fund generated in a single week. She didn't do it for optics. She did it because she genuinely wanted to save lives. I, on the other hand, was 34, a senior managing partner at Apex Vanguard Holdings. Unlike the Sterlings, I didn't inherit a single dime. I grew up in a drafty 3-bedroom house in a working-class neighborhood of Chicago. My dad was a high school history teacher who coached track after school. My mom was a pediatric nurse who pulled night shifts. They sacrificed everything to get me into a good state college, and from there, I scraped, clawed, and outworked every Ivy League legacy in Manhattan and San Francisco to build my career from the ground up. I specialized in distress asset restructuring, finding undervalued, struggling companies, stripping away the rot, and turning them into financial gold mines. Because Chloe had been burned before by guys looking for a fast track to her family's billions, our relationship was private at first. Deliberate. Careful. I wanted to prove to her, and to myself, that my intentions were completely pure. We dated for 8 months before I was finally invited to meet her parents. That first meeting took place at their penthouse overlooking the golf course in Beverly Hills. It wasn't a dinner, it was an interrogation. Arthur had spent the entire evening cross-examining me like a hostile witness while the hired help served microscopic portions of French cuisine. "Where did you grow up, Marcus?" "Public schools in Chicago, sir." "What did your parents do?" "Teacher and a nurse, sir." "Did you have a trust structure established for your education?" "No, sir." Student loans and academic scholarships. Do you own property? Yes, a modest condo in San Jose worth about $800,000. And what is your annual income at this apex firm? I remember that moment perfectly. I had smiled politely and said, my base salary is around $450,000. Which was technically, legally true. What I didn't mention, because I found it incredibly tacky to brag about wealth over soup, was my performance bonuses, my carried interest, my capital gains, and the heavy dividends generated by my personal investment portfolio. Arthur had looked at me like I was a stray dog that had somehow wandered into a country club. His wife, Eleanor, had smiled thinly, her eyes dripping with condescension, as she made passive-aggressive remarks about the complexities of managing true, generational wealth, and how difficult it must be to adapt to our world. To them, I was a middle-class social climber. A clever fraud who had looked at their daughter and seen a lottery ticket. After that dinner, Chloe had cried in the passenger seat of my car all the way back to San Jose. They'll never accept you, she had sobbed. They think everyone who isn't from their zip code is a threat to their money. I had held her close, kissing the top of her head, and promised her it didn't matter what her parents thought. We were building our own life, our own career, our own world. Part 3, Death by 1,000 Cuts. 6 months later, I proposed. I didn't buy a massive, vulgar rock to impress her socialite friends. I designed the ring myself, a simple, flawless platinum band with a 2.5-carat ethically sourced diamond chosen strictly for its perfect clarity and ideal cut. Chloe had said yes before I even finished getting down on one knee. The wedding, predictable as it was, became a nightmare of family politics. Arthur and Eleanor wanted a massive, 400-guest society affair at the Beverly Hills Hotel, complete with coverage in Vogue and Town and Country. Chloe and I wanted something intimate and deeply meaningful. We compromised on a beautiful ceremony at a historic church in San Francisco, followed by a reception at an exclusive, low-profile club. 150 guests. Elegant, but not ostentatious. Arthur had insisted on cutting the check for the entire wedding. I initially refused, but Chloe pulled me aside and explained that in her family's world, refusing to let the father of the bride pay was seen as a declaration of war, a public insult to their traditions. So, I relented. I let him pay for the venue, but I quietly handled the entire honeymoon myself, a 3-week luxury escape to the mountains and private coastlines of New Zealand that cost me $60,000 in cash. For 3 perfect weeks in New Zealand, we forgot about the sterlings. We hiked glaciers, stayed in boutique eco-lodges, and made love listening to the ocean. But when we returned, the reality of being married to a sterling caught up with me. For the next 11 months, Arthur and Eleanor subjected me to the death by 1,000 cuts treatment. When they introduced me to their billionaire associates at charity events, they would say, "This is Chloe's husband," completely omitting my name, my title, or my career. At large family dinners, I was systematically seated at the furthest table from the immediate family, sandwiched between distant teenage cousins and random plus-ones. They showered Chloe with extravagant luxury gifts, designer handbags, jewelry, trips, and gave me absolutely nothing, not even a basic card on my birthday. Eleanor called Chloe weekly, subtly dropping hints about the necessity of a postnuptial agreement to protect the family assets. Arthur went so far as to call me into his office under the guise of mentorship, only to suggest that I might be more comfortable taking a mid-level management position at a smaller firm in the Midwest, far away from the Sterling family's West Coast investment ecosystem. The subtext was loud and clear: you don't belong here. You are a temporary problem we are waiting to solve. Chloe fought bitterly with them. She threatened to cut them off entirely if they didn't show me basic human respect. But I always held her back. I told her, "Let it go, Chloe. We don't need their approval, and we certainly don't need their money." But my patience reached its absolute limit on that Saturday night in Malibu. "Dad, you are out of your mind!" Chloe yelled, her voice echoing off the high ceilings of the foyer. The 55 family members watched like they were front row at a Roman Colosseum. Arthur stood his ground, pulling an expensive leather-bound folder out from a nearby console table. He held it up like a trophy. "Am I, Chloe? I hired a premier private asset protection firm 3 months ago. A full forensic background check, asset trace, and financial analysis. I did what you were too blinded by love to do." He leveled a finger at me. "Your husband is a fraud, Chloe. His private equity firm, Apex Vanguard, is bleeding out. They dropped 3 massive institutional clients last quarter alone. His reported income is a complete joke, and my investigators have flagged multiple text messages where he is actively digging into your quarterly trust fund distributions. He is preparing to bleed you dry to bail out his failing company. A collective gasp ran through the room. I looked around. Chloe's Aunt Margaret had her hand over her mouth. Her cousin Rebecca was subtly holding her iPhone at chest level, recording the entire spectacle. Eleanor stood just behind Arthur, her face a masterclass in calculated pity, pretending to be devastated for her daughter, but completely failing to hide the smug satisfaction in her eyes. The sheer absurdity of the accusation made me do something Arthur didn't expect. I laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a cold, harsh, booming sound that cut right through his dramatic performance. "You think this is funny, Marcus?" Arthur sneered, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "I have your corporate tax filings right here. Your personal declared income is barely $200,000. You're a middle-class manager playing dress-up in a Tom Ford suit." Chloe turned her face toward me. And that was the exact moment the knife twisted. I saw the confusion in her eyes. I saw the tiny, terrifying seed of doubt that her father had spent her entire life planting finally begin to sprout. She looked at me, her voice a desperate, breaking whisper. "Marcus, please tell me what he's talking about. Why does he have these documents? Is the firm okay?" Seeing that flicker of doubt in my wife's eyes broke something profound inside me. She knew me. She slept next to me every night. But the psychological programming of the Sterling family wealth was so deep, so absolute, that faced with her father's evidence, she hesitated. I took a long, slow breath, forcing the white-hot anger down into a reservoir of absolute calm. "Chloe, look at me," I said, my voice level and deadly quiet. "Your father's private investigators are either completely incompetent, or they deliberately fed him a distorted narrative because they knew it's exactly what he wanted to hear." I turned my gaze to Arthur. Apex Vanguard didn't lose 3 clients last quarter. We restructured our portfolio. We dropped 3 smaller, high-maintenance retail funds managing under $50 million so we could clear bandwidth for an institutional sovereign wealth fund account worth $600 million. Our firm's revenue didn't drop, it increased by 18%. I stepped closer to him, ignoring the family members who shrank back. "And my tax returns show a low base salary because I am a senior managing partner. I don't take a standard W-2 salary like a corporate employee. I defer 90% of my guaranteed compensation into capital gains, carried interest, and equity reinvestment to minimize my tax liability. It is basic wealth management, Arthur. You should know that, considering you've never worked a day in your life outside of managing your grandfather's money." The room went so quiet you could hear the waves crashing outside. Arthur's jaw tightened, his veins bulging against his collar. "And the text messages?" Arthur barked, trying to reclaim the room. "Explain why you're asking my daughter about her trust fund distributions." "I asked her about her distributions once, 6 months ago," I said, staring him down. "Because Chloe came home devastated after losing a pediatric patient and told me she wanted to personally donate $250,000 to the hospital's research wing. I asked for a distribution schedule so my firm's accountants could structure the donation through a charitable lead trust, maximizing her tax write-off and protecting her principal. I was trying to help your daughter give money away to dying children, you miserable narcissist." Arthur's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He looked down at the paper in his hands, his triumphant smile completely evaporating. "Creative storytelling," Arthur stammered, his voice losing its boardroom authority. "Chloe, he's a smooth talker. He's a con artist. I am asking you, in front of this family, to protect yourself. File for divorce before he can touch a single percentage of your inheritance." The room erupted into a cacophony of hushed arguments. Uncles were whispering frantically, cousins were texting. I couldn't breathe the air in that house for another second. I turned to Chloe. She was sobbing, her hands over her face, completely overwhelmed by the public destruction of her family dynamic. "I am leaving," I told her quietly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder, though she was shaking too hard to look up. "Our apartment is in San Francisco. When you are ready to decide whether you trust your father's lies or your husband's character, come home." I turned on my heel and walked out. I walked past Eleanor, who shrank away from me, and marched right through the massive white oak front doors. Nobody tried to stop me. I got into my 3-year-old Audi A6. I had bought it used from an executive estate because I valued reliable German engineering and low depreciation over making flashy statements at red lights. I fired up the engine, hit the highway, and drove the long, dark, quiet hours back north to San Francisco. I arrived at our apartment in San Francisco at 9:30 p.m. It was a sprawling, 3-bedroom loft with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Bay Bridge and the dark water below. When we were looking for a place to live after our wedding, Chloe had desperately wanted to use her trust fund to buy a massive, $6 million gated estate in the hills of Pacific Heights, right down the street from her childhood friends. But I had dug my feet in. I told her, "Chloe, I want us to build something that belongs to us. Not an extension of your parents' empire." We had compromised on this loft. The purchase price was $2.4 million. I had paid for it completely in cash out of my personal liquid savings account, taking out a minor mortgage solely to finance the high-end architectural renovations. It was our home. The first place that belonged to both of us equally. Now, walking into the empty, silent space, it felt cold. Hollow. I walked over to the kitchen island, poured myself 3 fingers of Macallan 18, sat on the dark leather couch, and stared out at the city lights. My mind was racing. Arthur had tried to execute a public, social assassination of my character. He wanted me gone, and he didn't care if he broke his daughter's heart to do it. At 11:15 p.m., I heard the heavy click of the front door lock. Chloe walked in. Her makeup was completely ruined, black mascara masking her cheeks. Her beautiful navy blue cocktail dress, the one I had zipped up for her earlier that afternoon while kissing her neck, was rumpled and stained with salt tears. She set her designer purse on the counter and stood at the edge of the living room, maintaining a sharp, agonizing distance between us. "Tell me the truth," she said. Her voice was flat, hollow, completely exhausted. "About everything, Marcus." I set my glass down on the concrete coffee table. "What exactly do you want to know, Chloe?" She sat down in the armchair across from me, pulling her knees up to her chest. "Are we broke? Is Apex Vanguard collapsing? Did you marry me because you knew my trust fund was coming due when I turned 30? Each question felt like a physical blade into my chest. The fact that she was even asking them proved how deeply her father's psychological manipulation ran. "No, no, and absolutely not," I said, my voice steady but thick with emotion. "Then why does he have those documents, Marcus?" she cried out, fresh tears spilling over her eyelids. "He had bank codes, tax transcripts, corporate filings. He was so certain. My father has never lied to me about business. Why would he make something like that up? Because he didn't make up the data, Chloe. He intentionally misinterpreted it to fit the villain narrative he's been writing for me since the day we met." I stood up, walked into my home office, and grabbed my secure corporate laptop. I walked back into the living room, sat down right next to her, and flipped the screen open. I logged into my personal wealth management portal, an encrypted system verified by third-party institutional auditors. "Look at the screen, Chloe," I said. She hesitated, then leaned forward, her eyes scanning the glowing columns of numbers. "This is my primary liquid checking and cash reserve account," I said, pointing to the top line. "Current balance, $1,642,000. This is my personal investment portfolio spread across Vanguard index funds and heavy-yield Fidelity Tech bonds." I moved my finger down. "Current balance, $11,450,000. This," I said, opening a separate, certified corporate tab, "is the official, independent third-party valuation of my 15% senior partnership equity stake in Apex Vanguard Holdings, updated as of the end of last quarter. Current value, $8,600,000. And this loft," I concluded, "which I paid for in cash, adds another $2.4 million to my asset column. When you subtract the minor $200,000 renovation loan we have on this place, my personal, independent net worth as of 30 days ago is approximately $23.8 million. Chloe froze. Her breathing stopped entirely. She stared at the screen, her eyes darting back and forth across the commas and zeros as if waiting for the numbers to disappear. $23 million, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. You have $23 million. Yes, I said, closing the laptop and setting it aside. I am not poor, Chloe. I am not struggling. My firm is one of the most successful boutique private equity outfits on the West Coast, and I sure as hell didn't marry you for your trust fund. She looked up at me, her face a chaotic whirlwind of profound shock, confusion, and overwhelming guilt. Why didn't you tell me the exact numbers? Why did you let my parents think you were broke? Why did you let them treat you like a servant for 2 years? Because you never asked for my balance sheets, Chloe. And frankly, I didn't think it mattered. We don't talk about our personal wealth, we talk about our lives, your patience, our future. I told you I was a senior partner. I told you I was highly comfortable. You grew up in a world where people use their net worth as a weapon and a personality trait. I grew up in a world where you keep your head down, do your work, and don't brag about the size of your bank account. I stood up, walking over to the window, my back to her. I wanted you to love me for Marcus, the guy from Chicago who makes you laugh and supports your residency shifts. I didn't want our marriage to be a merger of 2 balance sheets. But your parents, they couldn't conceive of a reality where someone from outside their country club could actually out-earn them through sheer, hard work. Chloe buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as she wept. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I'm so incredibly sorry. I should have stood up on that table and screamed at him. I should have known you wouldn't lie to me. But he's my father, he's been the financial anchor of our entire family my whole life, and he was just so convincing. I walked back over, sitting beside her, pulling her trembling body into my chest. I loved her, but the wound was deep. Doubt is a terrible thing, Chloe. Once it's planted, it rots everything it touches. If our marriage is going to survive, you need to decide right now whose word you trust, your father's prejudice, or your husband's reality. The next morning, Chloe went into Stanford Health for her grueling Sunday shift. I stayed behind in the empty loft, but I didn't rest. The time for passive endurance was completely over. Arthur Sterling had declared war on my reputation in front of 55 influential people in my geographic and professional sector. In the world of private equity, trust and integrity are your only real currency. If rumors started circulating that I was a broke fortune hunter bailing out a failing firm, it could permanently damage my relationships with institutional investors. At 9 a.m., I called my personal corporate attorney, Graham Vance, a senior partner at a white shoe firm in San Francisco who had handled my asset protection and partnership contracts for 6 years. Graham answered on the second ring, his voice crisp. Marcus. It's Sunday morning. What's broken? I spent the next 20 minutes explaining every single detail of the ambush in Malibu, the private investigator, the distorted tax returns, the public declaration of fraud, and the fallout with Chloe. Graham was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously cold. What Arthur did isn't just tacky, Marcus, it's actionable. It's targeted defamation of character, potentially libelous if he has distributed those fabricated financial summaries to third parties. We can file a multi-million-dollar lawsuit by tomorrow morning. No, I said, staring out at the foggy bay. I don't want to drag my wife through a public court battle with her own father. It'll destroy her. I don't want to sue him, Graham. I want to utterly dismantle him. I want a financial disclosure so absolute, so legal, and so undeniable that he will have to choke on his own words. Graham let out a low whistle. You want a full transparency drop? Marcus, are you sure? Once the Sterlings realize you're wealthier than their daughter, the entire family dynamic permanently shifts. Old money doesn't handle embarrassment well. Prepare the disclosure, I commanded. I want every liquid account, every equity stake, every real estate holding, and every tax strategy verified by a top-tier accounting firm. Put a certified federal seal on the cover page. Have it ready by tomorrow. Consider it done, Graham said. I spent Monday morning at my office on the 32nd floor of a high-rise in the financial district. My executive assistant, Jennifer, took one look at my face when I walked in and quietly canceled all my non-essential meetings for the day. At 3:14 p.m., a secure, encrypted email landed in my inbox from Graham's firm. It was a 48-page PDF document. I opened it and scanned the pages. The cover sheet was a masterpiece of financial clarity. Certified Statement of Net Worth Principal, Marcus A. Vance. Total verified assets, $24,120,000. Total liabilities, $200,000. Secured residential mortgage, net position, $23,920,000. The remaining 47 pages were an unassailable mountain of evidence. It included certified bank letters, audited corporate equity valuations from Apex Vanguard, verified tax transcripts straight from the IRS database showing my deferred compensation structures, and a certified copy of the cash wire transfer for a loft. I didn't hesitate. I drafted a brief email, attached the PDF, and sent it directly to Chloe. Subject: the truth about my finances. Chloe. Attached is the certified, audited reality of my financial life, prepared by Graham Vance and verified by third-party forensic accountants. Show this to your father. Let him compare it to his investigator's bargain bin report. Then, let's talk about our future. Marcus. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Chloe. Her voice was trembling so violently she could barely speak. Marcus. I'm looking at it right now on my break, she gasped, her breath catching in her throat. 48 pages. You have more money than my father's entire personal holding company. He is going to completely lose his mind. Good, I said, my voice completely devoid of warmth. He publicly humiliated me based on a lie. He owes me my dignity, and he owes you an apology for trying to sabotage your marriage. What you do with that document now is up to you. On Tuesday afternoon, Chloe took a leave of absence from her shift and drove down to her parents' Beverly Hills penthouse alone. She had insisted on confronting them without me present, fearing that my presence would spark a physical altercation. I spent the day pacing my office, unable to focus on a single market chart. At 4:30 p.m., my phone lit up. Marcus. Chloe's voice sounded incredibly strange, tight, controlled, completely drained of emotion. They read the entire document. Every single page. And? I asked, my jaw tightening. Did he apologize? A long, heavy pause on the line. Not exactly. But, they want you to come down here. Tonight. At 7 p.m. They said they want to host a private dinner to discuss the financial disclosure and clear up any misunderstandings. Marcus, please come. For me. This is progress, right? It didn't feel like progress. It felt like a wounded animal trying to draw me into a smaller room so it could find a way to rewrite the narrative. But I looked at the picture of Chloe on my desk, saw her beautiful, smiling face, and nodded to the empty room. I'll be there at 7, I said. At 7 p.m. sharp, I arrived at the luxury high-rise in Beverly Hills. I was wearing my most lethal weapon, a custom, charcoal Tom Ford suit I had bought during a business trip to London, tailored so perfectly it felt like armor. The doorman, who had known the Sterling family for 20 years, recognized me and immediately keyed the private elevator straight to the 23rd floor. The elevator doors slid open directly into the private foyer of the Sterling penthouse. The walls were lined with museum-quality modern artwork and priceless Persian rugs. Constance opened the inner door. For the first time since I had known her, she looked visibly flustered. Her perfect, icy aristocratic composure was gone, replaced by an anxious, twitching smile. Marcus, she said, her voice strained. Come in, please. We're in the main living room. I followed her into the massive space. 30-foot ceilings, panoramic windows overlooking the entire Los Angeles basin, and an open terrace. Arthur was sitting in his oversized leather armchair, his reading glasses perched on the edge of his nose. The 48-page financial disclosure was resting flat across his lap. Chloe was sitting on the edge of the opposite sofa, her eyes red, watching me walk in like a lifeline. I didn't sit down. I walked right into the center of the room, stood directly under the crystal chandelier, and placed my hands in my pockets, maintaining absolute eye contact with my father-in-law. Arthur, I said, nodding coldly. Arthur took off his reading glasses, slowly folding them. He looked older. The arrogant, triumphant king of Malibu from Saturday night looked suddenly exhausted, his shoulders slightly slumped. He patted the document on his lap. This is an extraordinarily thorough profile, Marcus, he said, his voice completely neutral, trying desperately to maintain a shred of his dignity. I've had my personal corporate attorneys review it this afternoon. They have verified its authenticity. He cleared his throat, leaning forward. According to these audited figures, you are worth considerably more than we were led to believe. In fact, your independent liquid holdings and corporate equity exceed Chloe's current trust fund balance by a very significant margin. I am well aware, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a razor. Arthur's eyes narrowed, a flash of his old corporate arrogance slipping through. Which, of course, raises a very serious question, Marcus. Why would you hide this from us? Why would you allow this family to believe you were a struggling professional living off a modest salary? A marriage, and an integration into a family like ours, requires absolute transparency. You deliberately withheld this information. I couldn't help it. I let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed off the glass windows. Transparency. You are going to lecture me about transparency, Arthur. I stepped closer, my voice rising with absolute authority. You hired a private investigator to spy on my life. You ambushed me at a family celebration in front of 55 people. You branded me a con artist and a thief to my wife's entire extended family based on cheap, cherry-picked data because you were too financially illiterate to understand how partnership capital gains work. And now you have the absolute audacity to stand in your multi-million-dollar penthouse and lecture me about transparency. Marcus, please, Eleanor interjected, her hands waving dismissively. We were only trying to protect our daughter. You must understand how many fortune hunters target girls of Chloe's background. I swung my gaze to her, cutting her off instantly. Protect her from what, Eleanor? From a man who loves her with his entire soul. From a man who is completely financially independent. Or were you protecting her from someone who didn't fit your archaic, elitist definition of acceptable? You hated me from the day I told you my dad was a public school teacher from Chicago. You couldn't handle the fact that Chloe chose someone from the real world. The room fell into an absolute, suffocating silence. Chloe looked up at her parents, her face hardening into an expression of pure disgust that I had never seen on her before. Arthur stood up from his leather chair, walking slowly over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering lights of Beverly Hills. When he finally turned back around, the hostile boardroom predator was completely gone. He looked defeated. I may have been hasty in my assessment, Arthur said, each word sounding like he was swallowing broken glass. The information my firm provided was clearly incomplete. I accept that I made an error regarding your financial motivations. An error? I countered, leaning over the back of the sofa, staring him down. You didn't make an error, Arthur. You attempted a social execution. My reputation is everything in my industry. Trust is the only reason investors hand me hundreds of millions of dollars. You publicly defamed my character to 55 high-profile individuals. Word spreads. People talk. You think a quiet, hasty assessment text covers the damage you've done. Eleanor stood up beside her husband, her voice tight. All right, Marcus. The data is clear. You've proven your point. What exactly do you want from us? I looked at Chloe, who gave me a sharp, decisive nod. She was completely done with her parents' tyranny. Here is exactly what is going to happen, I said, my voice dropping into the cold, precise tone I used when restructuring a failing company. First, Arthur, you are going to draft a formal email. You will send it to every single person who was present in that Malibu foyer on Saturday night. You will explicitly state that your private investigation was completely fraudulent, that you completely miscalculated my financial profile, and that I am a highly successful senior partner whose net worth significantly exceeds your own daughter's trust fund. You will clear my name completely and definitively. Arthur's face turned completely white. Marcus, that would be incredibly embarrassing. It would make me look foolish to my entire peer group. You looked foolish the second you opened your mouth on Saturday, I said without an ounce of mercy. And second, from this day forward, you will treat me with the basic dignity and respect of a man who earned his place at the table. If I ever hear another passive-aggressive comment from Eleanor about my background, if I am ever sat at a kid's table again, or if you ever cross my boundaries, Chloe and I will cut you out of our lives completely. You will not see us for holidays, you will not be invited to our home, and you will never, under any circumstances, lay eyes on your future grandchildren. Do I make myself perfectly clear? Arthur looked at Eleanor, then down at the 48-page reality check sitting on his chair. He looked back at his daughter, who looked away from him, completely aligned with her husband. Yes, Arthur whispered, his shoulders dropping completely. I will send the email tonight. We left the penthouse 5 minutes later. We didn't stay for their private dinner. We didn't need their food, and we certainly didn't need their company. As we rode the elevator down to the garage, Chloe slipped her hand into mine, leaning her head against my tailored shoulder. Thank you, she whispered. For being strong enough to break their spell. We're a team, Chloe, I said, kissing her forehead. Always. Update 1, 2 days later. Wow, I didn't expect this post to blow up the way it did. To answer a few of the top questions in the comments, yes, Arthur actually sent the email. Chloe and I were copied on it yesterday afternoon at 4:15 p.m. It was a masterpiece of humiliating corporate doublespeak. He basically admitted that his external asset protection consultants provided a catastrophically flawed report, and explicitly stated that I am a senior managing partner at Apex Vanguard with a certified personal net worth of over $23 million, completely clearing me of any financial motivations. The fallout within the family has been absolute chaos. Chloe's Aunt Margaret immediately called her, laughing hysterically over how Arthur had to eat his own words in front of the entire lineage. Apparently, 2 of Chloe's cousins have already emailed me asking for investment advice and asking if Apex Vanguard is taking on new limited partners. I haven't replied, and I won't. Arthur tried to call Chloe this morning to ask if we were still coming on the family's private Christmas cruise to the Caribbean. Chloe told him that if he wants us anywhere near that boat, he needs to personally call my parents in Chicago and apologize to them for disrespecting the professions that raised me. Arthur is currently throwing a fit about it, but he'll bend. He realizes now that he doesn't hold a single card in this game anymore. Thank you all for the support. Don't ever let old money make you feel small just because you had to work for your success.